Now, I'd like to welcome our next guest to the programme. We're joined by John Lannon. John is the CEO of Doras. This is a Limerick-based organisation that works in the area of human rights. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
John, I was prompted to call you because last week I saw that you had commented on that desperate situation that we saw migrants drowning as they tried to cross from France to England. It's this area that you work in with trying to help individual people, but you also try to look at the bigger picture as well.
That's right, yeah. I mean, we're appalled, as I'm sure so many people were, with the fact that people were drowning in the English Channel now. And, you know, the desperation that drives people to take perilous journeys like that is something that very few of us can imagine. We're fortunate enough not to be living in a war zone or in a situation where oppression or persecution is going to cause us to have to just leave with whatever possessions we can take in our hands and make a really dangerous journey across land and sea.
And their one seemed to be particularly bad because it seemed they went out in a little dinghy type thing, but a man described it as something you would have as a pool for children in your garden, and there they were out in the open seas with that.
Absolutely, and this isn't unusual, sadly. It was a dinghy that wasn't fit for the journey that it was going on. It was, you know, in one of the busiest shipping routes in Europe, and people were expecting or were desperate enough to get onto that in the hope that it would take them to land where they could find protection and safety. And sadly, in the case of 27 people, including women and children, that didn't happen.
It just seems to underline a huge desperation. Absolutely,
it is. You know, we're living in a world now where we have, according to the UNHCR estimates, 82.4 million people who have been forcibly displaced. You know, we have over 26 million refugees in the world, people who have had to flee. They've had no choice but to do that. And we actually don't see very many of them in this part of the world. You know, some countries take a disproportionate amount of the burden. If you look at countries like Lebanon and Jordan and Uganda in Africa, they have millions of refugees each. You know, it's just a small trickle that make their way across to this part of the world.
And those millions of people then are almost, it seems to be a terrible future ahead for them because food is scarce, the conditions are poor, the housing is virtually non-existent, it's shanty type structures. Nobody's going to come to their rescue, I think.
It is. It's a perilous, difficult journey all the way. You know, if you look at the situation in France, for example, just outside Dunkirk now, where the people in those dinghies were trying to get away from, you know, the police are destroying the makeshift tent that people are living in. You know, if their property is getting lost, they're at risk. They need to get out of there. In many cases, you know, they may have family members in the UK. It may be the only option that they see open to them to either come to England or to come to Ireland or wherever is open to them, wherever is available. Sometimes for journeys that people take, you know, it's literally getting into a container or getting into a dinghy and hoping that it takes them to some place where they can seek protection.
And sometimes they're fleeing a situation where they're individually persecuted, the country is torn by war, it's a famine situation, and in some cases then somebody in the family has already made it to Ireland or England or somewhere else and is trying to encourage them to make the journey so they can be reunited. But your organisation would like that to be done in a much safer way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and if you look at it from the Irish point of view, you know, we've travelled, found new life in many parts of the world, and the least we could do is welcome people who are fleeing persecution and oppression here now. And like all countries, we have international obligations, particularly under the 1951 Geneva Convention. And there is a core principle that's called non-refoulement, which means that a refugee shouldn't be returned to a country where they face serious threats to their life or to their freedom. And at the moment, what's happening is that countries are finding ways to push refugees back, to push them away. And we hear talk now about, you know, Boris Johnson was talking even about getting troops onto the beaches in France and about other measures, processing asylum seekers offshore and things like that, you know.
And something that we've seen in the southern hemisphere as well, refugees being kept on islands away from on one territory to sort of control where they are.
Yeah, it is, and states always have the sovereign power to regulate entry. They have an obligation to guard and control and protect their borders. But international law provides and insists that measures to do that can't affect people who are seeking asylum. It's everyone's right to do that, and we do need to be providing safer routes for people. And instead of apportioning blame for the arrival of refugees, countries need to be working together to ensure safer routes that provide solutions and that undermine the trade of the smugglers that are putting people on those really dangerous dinghies that are coming across the channels, and there are options open. There are things. There's refugee resettlement programs, family reunification with people who are already here and have been given international protection. There are other ways, providing opportunities for people to come settle here for work or for education or other schemes.
Our system in Ireland, though, seems to be very varied. On one strand, you can look at those type of resettlement programs, different ways where people are helping people in need. But also then, as you said, there are students who come into this country who pay large fees to the colleges. They've got to process their visas. People who come to work in the health services or in the digital sector and all these other areas. The system in Ireland for managing those people's visas, some of that has been very poor. People standing in the rain in Dublin waiting to queue to get an appointment. It's improved slowly, but we don't seem to be well set up internally in terms of our bureaucrats to manage these people.
We're not, and unfortunately a lot of the work that we're doing in Doras is trying to assist people to get access to what should be their rights, so whether it's immigration related or it's people seeking asylum or it's people that are trying to just get access to the social welfare payments that they're entitled to. Then we end up having to spend a lot of time doing that. One of the first barriers is that we're not good at supporting people whose first language isn't English. A lot needs to be done in this area with service providers. We're slow in processing paperwork as well. So again, if you look at people who are living in direct provision now, who have come to Ireland to seek asylum, it takes years, and it shouldn't take years, to process their applications. And as a result of that, they're languishing in centres that are remote, they're cut off, isolated from the rest of society, and it's having a severe impact on their mental health. Yes,
some of the pictures you see of them, and it isn't widely shared. A lot of the pictures of them would show very desolate locations. There might be a series of little like mobile homes, but on a permanent structure, and they're set up, and there's tarmac macadam all around. There's no trees, there's no privacy, there's no grass. It's a really terrible existence for people in those provisions. They can't cook. It's a very difficult opportunity for them. This government, presently in office, have said that they will abolish that. Have they managed to make any progress on that yet?
Things are not moving as quickly as we'd like to see in this, and it's true, we haven't treated people who have sought asylum in this country well, going right back to the year 2000 when direct provision was set up. And it was set up, remember, as what was intended to be a temporary measure. 21 years later, we still have it. And it's like a recurring nightmare for people who spend years waiting for an outcome to their application. I should say, often in remote locations, poor services and supports, people can't obtain driving licenses. It's like being in a prison. We've heard it described to us as a prison, and people have even gone on to say, at least when you go to prison, you know when you'll be getting out. You're serving a sentence for a specific length of time.
And also, they weren't allowed to seek employment illegally until 2018 when that was introduced, and the first version of it was very restrictive on people. It was like giving you a right to work but taking it away with the conditions that were attached.
It was, and this had to be brought all the way to the High Court before the government allowed people who were in direct provision to work. And even still, it's problematic because the work permit is a sheet of A4 paper, and I can't fully understand it from the point of view of an employer. They're not clear on whether or not somebody who's in direct provision is allowed to work when somebody comes with a crumpled piece of A4 paper, but that's what they get now to confirm their right to work. But having said that, there are people with so many skills, so much expertise in direct provision centres, with education, with degree level, master's level and beyond, and that's a huge, or should be a huge richness for Ireland now as well. So instead of locking people away in isolated centres, we should be integrating, we should be welcoming them into society. People have fled from trauma and persecution. They're being re-traumatised in these direct provision centres. And as you say, this government has committed to ending direct provision. There is a white paper outlining how that would happen by the end of 2024. There's a lot of discussion happening about the accommodation models and what exactly will be done. Now, bear in mind that at this present time, we have a for-profit system where a small number of providers are making a huge lot of money out of direct provision, making millions out of it every year.
Yes,
we want to see faster action on ending this system.
Yes, that's the system that's operated at the moment. People tender for it, and then they're all doing that on a for-profit basis. The new proposal is that properly built units will be provided, and people wouldn't spend any longer than 4 months in there, but then they will hopefully be able to move to own-door accommodation. But we know in Ireland we have a huge housing crisis that the government seem to be really having a hard time tackling and resolving that. John, you mentioned the point that Irish people have travelled all over the world. We got that message too at times, being told there was no need for Irish people to be there and made feel unwelcome. This is the time of the year perhaps when we need to reflect on that there should be room at the inn for everybody?
Absolutely, there should. And as I mentioned, in the global context, when you look at the fact that over 82 million people have been forcibly displaced from where they should be able to live peacefully. We can and we should provide homes and safety and protection and sanctuary for more than we are providing at the moment. Now, the Irish Refugee Protection Programme have and continue to work on programs to allow people to come from Afghanistan, which has been ravaged, as we know, by
decades of war.
By crisis for decades, and is even worse now, perhaps, than it has been for quite a while. There has been an announcement from government back in September that there would be what's called an Afghan admissions program, where papers would be given to more people to come from Afghanistan. But again, that's slow. We welcome the fact that it was announced, but the delay in implementing it is really problematic. The idea is that people from Afghanistan who are resident here could apply for up to 4 family members to join them. The program hasn't come into operation yet. We're concerned about putting limits on just 4 because extended families are much bigger than that. How do you make a choice if you're somebody who's living in Ireland and you have...
And your hope would be that if there...
have family, that which ones can come and which ones can't.
If there are better formal channels, that might undermine, again, smugglers saying that they're the only option people have to take. John, I'm just conscious of the time. You mentioned the reason that there's over 82 million people displaced around the world. I've seen statistics on climate change that by the year 2100, which is just 80 years away, less than 80 years away, there will be 600 million climate refugees in the world. People in very wealthy parts of the country now who have a home, have a farm, has a business. We've seen it in Australia, in Canada, in America. Somebody could tomorrow morning have no home, no house, no business. Their property could be destroyed by fire or flooding or landslides. So this idea of looking after refugees is something that we really need to, I think, and how we process people coming to live in a country and how they become into society and into employment and education, how everybody has to contribute in society. I think it's something that really the governments are going to have to spend much more attention to in the years ahead.
Absolutely. We need far greater international cooperation on all of these issues. As you say, the climate crisis is causing untold damage already in many parts of the world, and it's starting to affect a lot of other areas of the world as well. And this is something that we're all going to have to cope with. We're all going to have to come to terms with, because it will become very real for all of us very, very quickly. And in the meantime, the cooperation, is essential. When you look at the refugee situation, there is a UN Global Compact on refugees where commitments were made. We've seen at COP26 as well that in terms of climate crisis, governments will make some concessions. They will argue, they will deal, but really, we're gone beyond the point where we should be looking to find ways to get out of taking action. We should have governments working together constructively to address these many crises that are facing the world today.
John, thanks for joining us. Your website is doras.org. You're based down in Limerick, and you do a lot of training, education, advocacy, as well as helping individual people. So if people are interested in learning more, they could visit your website.
Absolutely, yes. www.doras.org, and all the contact details are there.
Terrific, John. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
John, thank you. That was John Lannon. He's CEO of Doras.org, an organisation based in Limerick. I just wanted to talk to him about that issue of migrants and this awful situation they face, and something that we may see so much more of in the years ahead.